Tape. Perhaps my best years are gone, when there was a chance of happiness. But I wouldn't want them back, not with a fire in me now. No, I wouldn't want them back. Crap, motionless, staring before him. The tape runs on in silence. Curtain. In 1960, Beckett began another novel which was eventually called Comment c'est. In English this is translated as How It Is, which loses the resonances of the French title Comment c'est, to begin, and Comme on sait, How One Knows. Here Beckett faced an apparently insurmountable problem. How was he to progress beyond the apparent dead end of the unnameable? How was he to go any further than that expiring monologue without going back on himself? How was he to create a novel when he had, to all intents and purposes, killed off this genre to his own satisfaction? Taking a cue from his plays, Beckett gave the central voice a setting, though in keeping with his plays this was bleak in the extreme. The initially unnamed narrator is crawling through a sea of mud, in the course of which he encounters various similar figures. Behind them they all drag their few miserable possessions tied up in sacks. During the second part of the novel, the narrator encounters Pym, in the course of which he reveals that his own name is Bomb. This encounter is a grotesque parody of human intercourse, in all senses, as the two figures grapple and entwine in the mud before going on their separate ways. Bomb characterizes himself as hanging on by the fingernails to one's condition, and this is certainly no exaggeration. During the course of his progress through the mud, he has occasional vivid memories of a more realistic life. Some of these are distinctly autobiographical, though the suicide of Bomb's wife appears to be a mélange of quasi-autobiographical guilt and wish fulfillment. Things were not going well with Suzanne. This novel, if such it can be called, consists entirely of brief, unpunctuated paragraphs which appear to incorporate their own breath-like rhythm, if not meaning. This voice, these voices, no knowing, not meaning a choir, no, only one, but qua, meaning on all sides, megaphones, possible, technique, something wrong here. Wrong for never twice the same, unless time vast tracts, aged out of recognition, no for often fresher, stronger after than before, unless sickness, sorrow, they sometimes pass, one feels better, less wretched after than before. Unlike the similarly unreadable, unnameable, How It Is has meagre rewards for those who persist with the narrator across this mired literary bogland. From it I learned what little remained, learn what little remains of how it was before Pym, with Pym, after Pym, and how it is, for that too it found words. And so on, for pages on end, without relief. The critics were baffled, and even some of Beckett's most dedicated aficionados confessed themselves at a loss. In destroying the novel, this time Beckett appeared to have destroyed his own writing. By now Beckett's life with Suzanne had descended into a characteristic farce. His general behaviour and attitude toward the world, to say nothing of his heavy drinking and occasional affairs, made him impossible to live with. After all, he too found it all but impossible to live with himself. He and Suzanne still shared an apartment, but had come to a unique arrangement. Inside the front door, the apartment had two doors, one leading to his separate quarters, the other leading to hers. When Beckett wanted to communicate with Suzanne, he called her on the telephone. Despite this apparent alienation, their bond remained deep. They shared too much ever to part fully. Beckett never forgot all that Suzanne had done for him, the tireless efforts she had made to unload his manuscripts on uninterested readers. She was also the one who had lived with him and stood by him during his times of greatest travail. She alone had witnessed and shared his deepest miseries. In 1961, Beckett decided to marry Suzanne, as a show of good faith, as a recognition of what she had done, and to ensure that if he died, she would inherit the considerable fortune that was accumulating from the worldwide royalties earned by his works. Typically they travelled in secret to England, where they were married without fuss or friends in the anonymous coastal town of Folkestone. Beckett's only indication of where he was or what he was doing was a typically oblique postcard to a friend in Paris. Blood flows more calmly in the town of Harvey. William Harvey, who discovered the circulation of the blood, was born in Folkestone in 1578. From now on, Beckett increasingly busied himself with translations of his own work from French into English, as well as overseeing productions of his own plays in English, French, and German, in which he was also fluent. In between he wrote a number of more or less successful dramaticules and short prose pieces. Among these was a brief film script entitled simply Film. This was to star the great silent movie actor Buster Keaton, whose expressionless stone face had become his nickname and stock in trade. Beckett was a great admirer of Keaton, and in 1964 travelled to New York to assist in the production of Film. The aging Keaton agreed to emerge from his full-time poker-playing retirement only because he needed the money. His initial reaction was to declare that the apparently simple but philosophically profound script was quite beyond him. After a few contretemps, he moodily went through the motions in front of the camera with no attempt to act. Beckett was delighted. This was precisely what he required. Alas, off-screen, Keaton continued simply to go through the motions, and there was no meeting of minds between these two great stone faces of the 20th century. Beckett's shorter prose pieces are another acquired taste. They are by turn elusive and allusive. Despite such difficulty, they are well worth the effort. Readers will discover their own favourites among these more or less impenetrable texts. One of the more successful is the 1963 piece Imagination, Dead Imagine, in which the central voice attempts to do just that, coming to the realization, no, life ends, and no, there is nothing elsewhere, and no question now of ever finding again that white speck lost in whiteness. In October 1969, Beckett learned that he had won the Nobel Prize for Literature. At the time he was holidaying at a remote coastal resort in Tunisia. To his horror, the world's press descended upon his hotel, and he was besieged in his room. The pathologically shy and retiring Beckett was eventually persuaded to present himself to the press, where he faced a barrage of cameras. He was too overcome to reply to their questions, and simply sat there with his head bowed as if in shame. His health, frail at the best of times, took some time to recover from the shock. On his return to Paris, Beckett took up his translations again, occasionally producing another short prose piece or dramaticule. These latter are for the most part boldly experimental. For instance, Breath consists of just a page of instructions. Its setting is an empty stage littered with rubbish. No verticals, all scattered and lying. The action, such as it is, consists of a cry, later repeated, and the amplified recording of a deep breath, which inhales and then exhales. Inspiration, expiration, in the words of the stage directions, while a dim light slowly increases and then decreases. The entire drama takes less than a minute. Yet in the right circumstances it can produce a striking effect, giving pause for thought. Our breath is our very life, our inspiration and our expiration. What could be more simple? This, basically, is all we are. Some of these dramaticules work, others are strangely unsatisfactory, being both slight and profound at the same time. But even in this form Beckett was able to produce the occasional masterpiece. One among these is Not I. It is, again, reductionist in the extreme. The stage is in darkness, with a spotlight focused on a mouth, which speaks through a hole in the black backcloth. Downstage is a dark, listening figure. The female mouth speaks in a torrent of disjointed, all but meaningless words. Gradually the effect of the naked, isolated mouth and its jumble of words and phrases takes on a mesmerizing and powerful meaning of its own. So disconnected, never got the message, or powerless to respond, like numbed, couldn't make the sound, not any sound, no sound of any kind, no screaming for help, for example, should she feel so inclined. Scream, screams, then listen, silence. Scream again, screams again, then listen again, silence. No, spared that. The effect is both horrific and tragic, and appears to express the being of humanity on a deeply fundamental level. It is primitive, inarticulate, yet seems to be groping toward some extreme of articulacy. No idea. what she was saying. Imagine. No idea what she was saying. Till she began trying to delude herself. It was not hers at all. Not her voice at all. And no doubt would be unnameable. How was he to go any further than that expiring monologue without going back on himself? How was he to create a novel when he had, to all intents and purposes, killed off this genre to his own satisfaction? Taking a cue from his plays, Beckett gave How It Is, which loses the resonances of the French title Commencer, to begin, and Comme on sait, how one knows. Here Beckett faced an apparently insurmountable problem. How was he to progress beyond the apparent dead end of the tape? Perhaps my best years are gone, when there was a chance of happiness. But I wouldn't want them back, not with a fire in me now. No, I wouldn't want them back. Crap, motionless, stiff the central voice, a setting, though in keeping with his plays this was bleak in the extreme. The initially unnamed narrator is crawling through a sea of mud, in the course of which he encounters various similar figures. Behind them they all drag their few miserable possessions tied up in staring before him. The tape runs on in silence. Curtain. In 1960, Beckett began another novel which was eventually called Comment c'est. In English this is translated as